How do we create something that's beyond just this sort of ecosystem that we've just created for ourselves, which I think, unfortunately, because mobile came so quickly, how do we get that innovation in? Obviously, emotion is the next piece of the puzzle. Moments-based advertising. How do we not look at just a static view and a pixel, screen estate, a chunk, and how do we look at something that is meaningful? Now, this little fella here scares me. And I'll tell you why he scares me, because this is the new generation. You have to remember, these guys aren't going to be used to just looking at something and looking at an interstitial and going, oh, OK, I guess I'm going to buy that now because they told me to. These guys were born with the iPhones in their cribs, right? And this is, even to me, I bought it 4 years ago. I was still, 4 years, although that was a big chunk of my life, I was still a little bit later on, and I had to learn it, right? But these guys, parenting by iPad, we're seeing that a lot. But this is why we need to be really aware of this. And so the first way to go beyond attention is moments. And again, I use that word a lot. And what I mean by that is a lot of marketers that find success in connecting beyond just functionality is actually by talking about the moments in which these things can affect them in real life, right? Showing situations. Again, I don't want to refer to the most ultimate cliche example, but of course, Apple does this really well. Look, I mean, this is a picture of a couple, I think, or maybe friends, whatever. They're pretty cute, so they must be a couple, in front of the Eiffel Tower, and with an iPad with 3G, and apparently they're probably viewing something online, which would have cost them $3 in roaming anyways per minute. It's not like it's realistic, but again, it's a moment, right? You're seeing it, you're like, oh my God, this is great. I could look like that, right? So that is why that's great. It's moment, it's emotion, right? That is why Apple does that really well. And so again, touch points, we're too fixated on showing, okay, this is what it'll do for you, X, Y, Z, right? And at the same time, we have to realize that it's how it affects us that we want to see visually. We're very shallow animals. We want to see things visually and how it could affect or how it could look like. Second is serendipity. Now, the word serendipity, of course, we think of luck, we think of certain things that fly into our head when we think of the word. But the way that I think of it, it's actually serendipitous usage, is what I call it. How do people sort of stumble upon their own way of interacting with your brand, of interacting with the ways that you've sort of shown them possibilities, and again, moments. And I'm going to reference a few mobile app examples. So there's one, I know we like to rat on them a lot because they raise a lot of money, but I'll be very honest with you. One of the things that Color did really well is and by the way, Color, for those of you who aren't familiar, are a sort of proximity-based photo sharing app. So if everybody in this room decided to load Color and take pictures of me dancing around on stage, it would all show up and everybody around you would by default be able to see it just by harnessing everybody together by one common data point, which is location. But one of the things that Color did really well, and another app called Yobongos, you'll notice that the interface doesn't have a lot of labels, right? And it doesn't have a lot of labels because they want you to kind of go, this is how I'm using it. Ooh, I just stumbled upon my usage of it. And again, much like how we interact with things, again, how we interact with advertising, how we interact with content, right? It's finding our way. And if we've figured out a way, we like that way, we'll stick to it. And so that's why customization, that's why Tumblr, again, it's all about that type of customizability, but then how people can connect to that. Number 3 is knowledge and validation. So beyond just attention, again, is how we can create communities and how we can create knowledge communities where people feel, and what I call, by the way, the E moment. And what I mean by the E moment is when, for example, someone retweets you on Twitter. You feel happy, right? It's that little jolt of crack. You're like, yes, someone actually cared about what I said. I'm important now. And even though if it's a bot, you're like, oh, at least the bot was programmed to listen to me and actually retweet it in the first place. I mean, these are the things that, again, we look at. This is knowledge and validation. This is how, as human beings, we're wired to think, this is me meaning something. And Quora, of course, does this really well. Again, for those of you who aren't familiar with Quora, Quora is a sort of I'm not going to try to describe it too crassly because it would do injustice to its beauty, but it's a sort of a crowdsourced knowledge pool of Q&A. And again, what it does really well, though, is through validation. You can essentially vote up and follow anything. And again, Namesake is a conversation tool. They do this really well. And Namesake is actually trying to do this with brands, where you can start having real-time conversations, right? Imagine a Twitter sort of hashtag, but initiated like that, like on call. And what they've done is, again, you can see popular comments like, I'm so important, someone actually voted up my comment, that's so great. And then you look at FormSpring, same thing, smiling, right? They actually went as obvious to call it smiling at something, right? I know you and I probably agree that Facebook has single-handedly sort of eroded the value of the word like. But I'm sure at some point, all emotional words are going to be used by internet startups, and we're all going to lose value in exactly what it means. So number 4, emotional ROI. So a lot of us like to throw around the term ROI, right? We're marketers. We want to figure out exactly what our return is. We spent some money here. I blew that money on that blimp that's going to show some pink trails of smoke, and I assume that that's going to give me some return. But here's the thing. Emotional ROI is a little bit different, right? It looks at the further brand building value of what you've been able to create. I'll be very honest with you. Remember the Marlboro Man? Although that was created in an age where we didn't realize how bad smoking was, people were able to relate to him, right? And the Green Giant, maybe he was too big for people to relate to, but again, relatable, right? And these personified characters, these brand builders, ultimately, I think is how we created those connections. And emotional ROI came over time, right? When I started eating Happy Meals as a kid, now I walk by McDonald's, I still smell it, I still really want some. That is, again, how that emotional ROI was built over time. It's not instant. But I think emotional ROI, at the end of the day, is a competitive advantage, right? How do you go beyond just really lever-based, trigger-based things, right? Pricing structure, okay, I'll trim down margins, blah, 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 blah. Asymmetric information, but again, how do we go beyond that? So when you have an ROI based on how much time you've invested in being proactively loyal to someone, I call it proactive, almost like a reverse loyalty chain. What I mean by that is, for example, like Kiip, when you create that reward, when you're giving that person that initial pump, they're going, hey, you know what? That brand didn't ask me to do anything for them. Too long has it been sort of like a Pavlovian thing, right? It's like, go dance for me, do this, and then, tweet about me, and then like me on Facebook, and then, ooh, I'm like a little puppet master. Like, you don't do that, please, because here's the thing. At the end of the day, we want people to choose for themselves. This is, again, emotional ROI. If someone's going to tell you what to do, you're not going to build emotional ROI with them.